You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of November 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. Will this make a difference to the conflict in the Middle East? Then,
Prime Minister Modi's visit represents a significant milestone in enhancing cooperation between our two nations.
It's the first time in over 50 years that an Indian Prime Minister has visited Guyana. We'll have more detail on the historic trip. Moldova has signed a security deal with the UK, and Romania has also pledged to support the former Soviet state. We'll find out more. Then we'll have a rustle through the newspapers with Charles Hecker. What do you have for us, Chuck?
Good morning, Georgina. President-elect Donald Trump has a new Attorney General choice. There is a genuine exit from Elon Musk's social media platform, and you'll never believe who's moving to the Cotswolds.
Thank you. More from Charles a little bit later on. Andrew Muller is going to look back at the events of the week and will reflect on COP29, which winds up today. And finally, we'll ask if LVMH's investment in the Musée d'Orsay is the way forward for arts patronage. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Republican Matt Gaetz has dropped out of the running to be Donald Trump's Attorney General after pushback from Senate Republicans. Brazil's federal police filed a formal accusation with the country's Supreme Court, accusing former President Jair Bolsonaro of plotting a coup to overturn the 2022 election. And Thailand's Constitutional Court has rejected a request to stop billionaire and former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra from being involved with the ruling Pheu Thai party. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the International Criminal Court in The Hague announced yesterday that it's issued warrants for the arrest of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as a warrant for Hamas leader Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Masri, also known as Mohammed Dief. Well, I'm joined now by Hannah McCarthy, who's a foreign correspondent normally based in Beirut. Hannah, the ICC says Mohammed Dief is responsible for the October the 7th, 23 massacre that sparked the war. Now, Israel says it killed Dief in an airstrike. Hamas has never formally acknowledged the death of him. Is he alive?
Maybe listeners may remember that there was a kind of massive barrage of rockets fired on Al-Mawasi earlier in the year as part of an attack that Israel says killed Mohammed Dief when he was above ground. He's the military chief for Hamas in Gaza. There has never been, evidence like we saw for Yahya Sinwar or Ismail Haniyeh of his death. It's entirely possible that because of the extent of the strike that killed him, there is no kind of remains as such to be found. But it's certainly, I think, in the ICC's interest to have to issue arrest warrants against someone like Mohammed Dief alongside the Israeli arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Minister of Defence Yoav Gallant, as what we've seen immediately is criticism from the US, from the Czech Republic, calling this an outrageous decision by the ICC, and the fact that they're kind of making an equivalence between the atrocities committed by Hamas and what they call a military operation by the US. So it's certainly in the ICC's interest to be able to bring this kind of arrest warrant against Mohammed Dief, because they say they don't yet have confirmation of his death like they have for Yahya Sinwar or Ismail Haniyeh.
So the ICC says Israel's acceptance of the court's jurisdiction is not required. So what do these warrants really mean in practice?
Well, the ICC is a statute that has been agreed to by 124 member states. These 124 member states are supposed to arrest any individuals which arrest warrants have been put out for. So certainly it puts pressure on Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant in terms of their international travel. So listeners may know the US is not a member of the ICC, nor is Qatar or Egypt. So it's still Netanyahu and Gallant will be able to travel there. But it does put pressure on any EU travel that Netanyahu might be considering. And it does kind of add kind of additional pressure, social pressure and political pressure on how diplomatic negotiations happen with these officials while there are arrest warrants out for them.
What are the chances that this will just further isolate them and complicate efforts to negotiate a ceasefire?
Well, the ceasefire negotiations so far are being carried out by countries that are not part of the ICC statutes. So there won't be an immediate issue with those negotiations, but certainly in terms of the kind of social isolation within the EU and other countries, it will add pressure to the Israeli government. You know, for example, Vladimir Putin, we understand, decided not to travel to South Africa earlier in the year because he feared that he might be arrested. He has an ICC arrest warrant out for him. Obviously, Vladimir Putin is still very much a free man, but it certainly limits travel, for these, senior politicians and leaders.
So Amos Hochstein has been doing a great deal of travelling. He's led the Biden administration's effort to end more than a year of conflict in the region. He's back in the area. Where's he been so far on this visit, and has he reported any progress?
So he touched down in Beirut earlier in the week. Locals were quick to notice that there was a pause in airstrikes while he was there, and they quickly returned after he left. So he met with Nabi Berri, who he's a Shia political leader, and he's kind of the de facto prime minister at the moment. And then he went to Israel to continue negotiations there. We don't see signs that there's an immediate breakthrough. Again, we're seeing this. We're hearing the same rhetoric we've heard regularly throughout the last year, that there are hopes of a breakthrough, but no clear signs yet that there is going to be a ceasefire.
And if there was, what might a deal with Lebanon look like?
So again, there has been a deal, obviously, in South Lebanon following the 2006 war. So that there was an agreement there that Hezbollah would not operate in South Lebanon, that the Lebanese army would be deployed there. That was not really upheld. Hezbollah were continuing to operate there. So one of the sticking points in the negotiations over southern Lebanon is whether Israel will have the ability to continue to strike in Lebanon after a ceasefire if it sees violations of that agreement. If it sees, Hezbollah fighters, launching strikes, can it or organising or carrying out operations, can it strike inside Lebanese territory? Lebanon's government says that this would be a violation of its sovereignty and that it will not agree to a ceasefire that effectively allows, Israel to strike at it whenever it wants. So that's one of the big sticking points. And again, it's hard to see, where that agreement will lie when hopefully there is one concluded.
And I wonder if the ICC action makes a deal more or less likely.
Well, people may or may not remember this, but the last head of the ICC court, was placed under sanctions by the US. They weren't allowed to travel to the US. And again, we've heard a lot of rhetoric from, incoming US President Donald Trump about his condemnation of the ICC. So it's in a very politically delicate situation in terms of how it operates. And I think it'll certainly be facing attacks and criticism from the US in the coming months, and it looks like it may be sanctioned. But at the same time, it's an important step that the ICC took these arrest warrants. It has a long history of focusing on the trials of African leaders, and I think there have been kind of long charges that it is not doing enough to hold Western leaders to account. Benjamin Netanyahu is the first Western-style leader to have an arrest warrant issued. So it's quite an important milestone in the court's history.
And what's been the reaction from Netanyahu and his government?
Netanyahu described this as an anti-Semitic decision. He said Israel rejects this absurd and kind of false action. There's pretty kind of widespread criticism and negative perceptions of the UN within Israel. So it's been something of a kind of unifying response across the Israeli political spectrum in terms of, criticizing the arrest warrants. President Isaac Herzog criticized it. At the same time, I think it's interesting to see the response in the EU. France says it supports the ICC and its fight against impunity. It's also interesting to see the UK government coming out and saying it supports and respects the independence of the ICC. Belgium's foreign minister, also said, crimes are being committed in Gaza and they have to be prosecuted at the highest level. At the same time, the EU is not united on that. We've seen divisions, in terms of the response from the Czech Republic and Italy. But it will be interesting to see what the EU's actual response is and how it actually supports the ICC's decision this week.
Hannah, thank you very much indeed. That's Hannah McCarthy there, and this is The Globalist. 12 minutes past 7 here in London. That's 3:12 in Georgetown. After stopping in Nigeria and at the G20 summit in Brazil, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi finished the last leg of his three-nation visit in Guyana yesterday. It's the first time in 56 years that an Indian Prime Minister has visited the country. Guyana's a South American nation with many citizens of Indian origin. It also serves as the headquarters for the 15-member Caribbean trade bloc known as CARICOM. Well, I'm joined now by Maya Sharma, who's a journalist based in Bangalore. Maya, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Why has no Indian leader visited Guyana since Indira Gandhi back in 1968?
It certainly has been a very, very long time since Prime Minister of India has visited that country. It could, not to put too transactional a spin on it, but Guyana has recently discovered good reserves of oil. And India is, I'm sure, very interested in getting a chance to actually import that oil. India is a huge consumer, and it also is interested in helping with the prospecting and the refining of oil in Guyana. And that is a relatively recent discovery. But having said that, it is, of course, it is a close relationship between the countries. I mean, for many reasons, simply in terms of, as you mentioned, the number of people of Indian origin who are there, over 300,000, many of whom went there as indentured labor back in the 1800s. But culturally, there is a huge tie there. So it is a little surprising, in fact, that there has been this half-century gap between visits, given the number of people who are there, and given the fact that many of them did, in fact, support the Indian cricket team during the recent World T20 Championship when the Indian team were playing in Guyana.
Now, as you say, there's been this oil discovery and Guyana is now identified as the world's fastest growing economy. I wonder what, beyond oil, what opportunities for collaboration does Guyana present for India?
Well, of course, yes, oil is, of course, very, very big. And as you said, the growth of Guyana economically has been tremendous in the last few years. But other things as well, not just Guyana, but the whole Caribbean group as well, CARICOM. What India is looking at there is like capacity building. In fact, Prime Minister Modi presented words for development, which actually spell out CARICOM, whether it's capacity building, innovation, technology and trade, and cricket and culture, ocean economy, medicine and healthcare. There are many different fields where India wants to be more involved with Guyana and with the West Indies and the Caribbean countries as a whole. So there's a lot of chance. And also, it must be said that China is also fairly active in Guyana, and India does have this, to put it politely, a rivalry with China when it comes to that. They would also like to have influence in this country as well. China, of course, has established itself much more so in the country in terms of infrastructure development, but India would also like to get a look in with what Guyana has to offer, especially with the economy growing the way it is.
So Modi addressed Parliament in Guyana. What did he say?
Well, on this special address, now Prime Minister Modi is kind of making a habit of addressing foreign parliaments. He's done 14 so far. And his special address to the Guyanese parliament, he did say he prioritized that the country should prioritize democracy and humanity. And he also spoke about how space and sea should really be areas not of conflict, but that it was time to remove conditions that create conflict in the world. Of course, right now there are many, many conflicts going on around the world, and he has been saying it has not a time for conflict. And he said that despite the distance between the two countries, I mean, they're on opposite sides of the world, he said they do have a shared heritage and democracy. The heritage, of course, because of the large Indian population there. And he said it was a kind of bridge of opportunity between India and South America. And of course, India is trying to take leadership when it comes to the global South. And he said that close ties with Guyana would be a very good chance for a united global South. And he appealed for democracy first, humanity first, and said that India has never moved with an expansionist mindset. This is all in his address to the parliament on Thursday evening.
I mean, let's just talk about that South-to-South relationship, because it does seem India's positioning itself to be a leader there. He talked about members coming together to promote a new global order. What is his ambition?
Well, definitely, I think the world at large is looking at maybe a grouping of countries which is not the Western bloc. You have BRICS, which is definitely not the usual Western democracies, which actually tend to dictate terms to the rest of the world and which are definitely seen as being the voice of the international community. There has definitely been a push for countries outside those Western democracies to come together. And this, like even the closeness with CARICOM, is also an indication that India is looking at other countries, not just the West, whether it comes to trade, whether it comes to diplomatic ties as well, to try and enhance this kind of conversation between the countries of what is known as the global South. They do believe that by getting in at this stage, there can be a greater amount of trade for India, for all the countries, and that it need not always involve the Western democracies, which have held sway over the last couple of centuries.
Yeah. What's in it for the wider CARICOM region?
Well, CARICOM, of course, does have ties with India in terms of trade already. It does have that. But they are looking at actually providing other things which India may have expertise on, whether it's technology. Also looking at agriculture and food security as well. And another point which Modi made about climate change. He does say that developing countries like India and Guyana may be paying the price for climate change, which could be largely the responsibility of the developed economies. So they do hope to have these ties. And like I said, in the oil production as well, perhaps getting involved in the refining of the oil, in addition to prospecting for it. So the CARICOM country, I mean, and I must also say that cricket is a huge tie between the two countries, whether it's Guyana itself or the West Indies at large. India and the West Indies worship cricket. And with names like the West Indian giants are household names in India as well. So cricketing is a big tie, as well as culture. The cultural ties between the large Indian population and their ancestral land are also very huge. So there's a lot of scope really for growth in the relationship between the two countries and the West Indies at large.
And finally, what did Modi's opposite number say, the Guyanese leader, in response to all of this?
You know, the president, Mohammad Irfan Ali, has been extremely warm in what he said about Prime Minister Modi. He hosted dinner for him, and he said that we have had you for 2 days, but we cannot have enough of you, are the words he actually used. He also spoke about the cricketing ties, and he conferred the Guyana's highest national award on Prime Minister Modi, as did Dominica. And it's going to be followed by an award from Barbados as well. And Ali said that he also spoke about India's growing influence in the world under Modi. And he talked of Modi's strength, passion, and compassion of leadership, and said he had brought dignity and pride to India, but that cannot have enough of you was a very interesting phrase to use for the Indian Prime Minister.
Maya, thank you very much indeed. That's Maya Sharma there. Now, still to come on the programme.
We learned this week yet more about the calibre of person who will be leading the free world for the 4 years from January 20th, assuming, of course, that the free world lasts 4 years from January 20th.
Andrew Muller tells us what we learned this week. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now it's time to have a look at today's newspapers. And joining me in the studio, Charles Hecker, who is the author of Zero Sum, the Arc of International Business in Russia. Good morning to you, Charles.
Good morning, Georgina.
Big news from from the United States. Let's take the New York Times' coverage of Trump's pick to replace his Attorney General.
That's right. President-elect Donald Trump has faced his first setback in trying to assemble a cabinet, and that is his first candidate for the position of Attorney General, which runs the Justice Department in the United States and is the country's chief law enforcement officer. His initial candidate, Matt Gaetz, withdrew from the race. And that is because it was clear that enough senators would not vote in favor of his nomination when the moment comes. And with lightning speed, he has replaced Matt Gaetz with a candidate called Pam Bondi. And the New York Times tells us Trump picks Pam Bondi, Florida's former top prosecutor, there's a bit of a mouthful, for Attorney General after Gaetz withdraws. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General for the state of Florida and adds yet another Floridian component to an administration that's shaping up to draw quite a few resources from the Sunshine State. She's a very close friend of Susie Wiles, who is the incoming chief of staff to the Trump administration, and has been a very, very close associate of the Trump campaign. She was one of the people running around the United States, we're told by the New York Times, filing lawsuits state by state in the event that the outcome of the election was to be disputed. She's about as close an advisor you can get to Trump as there is.
Mind you, it wasn't always the case. Back in 2013, her law firm was considering joining a suit against Trump University. Then suddenly she was given a donation of $25,000, and guess what? It went away.
Miraculously, the lawsuit disappeared. Pam Bondi's background is not without controversy, and one of them is precisely what you've just mentioned, and that is that there was a $25,000, rather chunky, political donation made to a political action committee supporting her candidacy for the Florida role. The Attorney General in the state of Florida is an elected position. Trump University, of course, we know, collapsed in bankruptcy in the state of Florida, leaving thousands of students high and dry with unrefunded tuition bills, and the university became the subject of an investigation. That investigation miraculously disappeared upon the arrival of the donation. Ms. Bondi and her associates deny that there was any connection between the two. Pam Bondi, as Attorney General, opposed same-sex marriage when that was on the ballot in Florida, although she has since softened her approach towards LGBTQ rights. And she was a lobbyist for a while who worked on behalf of General Motors and Amazon and Uber.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see where that goes, isn't it? I mean, he can throw all the names he likes around, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee them the job.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because there's speculation that he put Gaetz out there almost as a sort of trial balloon in the full knowledge that the confirmation fight would be extremely difficult, and that if he withdrew, whoever he nominated next would sail through. just because there was the sort of the sacrificial lamb of Matt Gaetz to lead the way. We'll see. Pam Bondi is a much less controversial nominee than Gaetz, although the bar is set fairly low for that. She will still be a firebrand attorney general supporting the Trump agenda.
And what it does, of course, is it lets Gaetz off. I mean, he's been able to resign, I want to say with honour intact, not exactly, but you know what I mean.
That's right. So when Gaetz was nominated for attorney general, he immediately resigned his position as representing the 1st District of Florida in the U.S. Congress. His resignation shut down an investigation into his rather controversial past, extinguishing any possibility that he would be charged for having sex with a minor and attending drug-fueled parties. And he has told people who've spoken to him since his resignation that there's no way he's ever going back. He's not going to undo the resignation. He's not going to run for re-election. He's out of Congress.
Now, we know a lot of the things that he said because he tells us directly on his social media platform, as does Donald Trump and various others. But as the FT reports, it's exit time.
That's right. We finally have an exit that sounds like exit. And we're going to the Financial Times, which can't resist a good pun because the headline tells us mass exodus, professionals desert Elon Musk's network. This is one of the big reads in the FT, and it's a really interesting story about plummeting membership on Elon Musk's social network platform. We're told that 60,000 people a day are deactivating their accounts on X, and that's where we get the exit from. That is not an enormous drop in subscriptions, considering that there are hundreds of millions of subscribers to X, formerly known as Twitter. The angle in the FT's exploration of this phenomenon is that it is the professional class now that is leaving Twitter. We've had celebrities leave. We've had progressive liberals leave. We've had, all sort of performative departures from Twitter. But now it appears that people who use the network for legitimate professional purposes, to share information, to harvest information, to create professional communities, that these individuals are also exiting Twitter.
And where are they going?
So, good question. Blue Sky, which is a similar social media platform with things that kind of look and feel and sound like tweets, Blue Sky membership has soared as a result of the controversy associated with Elon Musk. The other thing is that because the people who are leaving Twitter most recently are of the professional class, LinkedIn, another social media platform, has gained an awful lot of members, the FT tells us, as a result, including the North Wales Police Force, which has left Twitter and a huff and lots of other sort of various associations.
Are you on Blue Sky?
Not yet.
Okay, I am. Please follow me there.
How's the water over there?
It's great. And, the tradition seems to be that your first, not tweet, your first whatever posting is of your pet and your bookshelf. And those are the two loves of my life. So
right, I can do the bookshelf. I'll have to work on the pet.
You can borrow mine. On the subject of exits, you mentioned at the top that somebody was moving to the Cotswolds. Who is that and why?
That's right. If you are flicking through the Times today, you will come across the headline that says, Ellen DeGeneres leaves the U.S. for the Cotswolds after Trump win. And that is because Ellen and her wife, actress Portia de Rossi, were spotted in Jeremy Clarkson's pub at a gig by the Corrs in the Cotswold. And Ellen DeGeneres and her wife are among a number of American citizens, celebrities and otherwise, who on the eve of the elections threatened to leave the country if President Trump won. Some are leaving for Canada, some are leaving for other parts of Europe, and I suppose you can't blame people for wanting to move to the Cotswolds. It's a rather nice sort of slice of England and UK life. And Ellen DeGeneres and Portia de Rossi are going to be cozying up to locals David and Victoria Beckham, Kate Moss, Sir Patrick Stewart, Elizabeth Hurley, the artist Damien Hirst, and of course a designer Stella McCartney. They are leaving, supposedly, a massive mansion in Malibu. There's another mouthful for you, where they were rubbing elbows with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. So they're sort of swapping English neighbors in California for English neighbors in England.
I don't know how De Rossi and DeGeneres met, but many people in Japan, I'm sorry, that was such a clumsy segue.
No, these are the smoothest transitions in the business.
Many people in Japan meet on dating apps.
That's right. So for a little human interest story here at the end of the segment, we're going to the Japan Times that says around a quarter of Japanese married couples in their 20s met through dating apps. And, you know, the Japan Times is full of fantastic Japanese demographic stories. And we're reminded at the very outset that today, November 22nd, is Good Couples Day in Japan. And so what the Japan Times tells us is that 24% of couples who are married and in their 20s met their spouses on a dating app. And this is a really, really big change because older demographic groups in Japan, the story tells us, are meeting at work or they're being fixed up by friends. Those are the number one and the number two ways of meeting your spouse if you're older than your 20s. But even those groups are moving on to the apps, and everyone that the Japan Times talks to says that the apps are better because you can be more choosy. And you can sort of do this how and whenever and wherever you want.
Absolutely. Charles, don't know if you're on an app, but...
Whatever it is, it's not working.
Charles Hecker, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Hardline Republican Matt Gaetz withdrew his name from consideration as President-elect Donald Trump's Attorney General after the former lawmaker faced opposition from Senate Republicans over his past conduct. Gaetz, who resigned from the US House of Representatives last week, was the subject of an ethics committee probe into allegations of having sex with an underage 17-year-old girl. Former Florida Attorney General and loyalist Pam Bondi will be nominated instead. Brazil's federal police filed a formal accusation with the country's Supreme Court, accusing former President Jair Bolsonaro of plotting a coup to overturn the 2022 election, along with dozens of ex-ministers and senior aides. The final police report caps a nearly 2-year investigation into Bolsonaro's role in the election-denying movement that culminated in riots by his supporters that swept Brasilia, the capital, in January 2023, just a week after his rival, President Lula da Silva, took office. And Thailand's Constitutional Court has rejected a petition seeking to stop billionaire former Premier Thaksin Shinawatra from interfering in the running of the ruling Pheu Thai party. Political heavyweight Thaksin, the father of Prime Minister Shinawatra, has repeatedly denied holding sway over the party since his 2023 return from 15 years of self-imposed exile. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. The United Kingdom and the former Soviet state of Moldova have signed a defence and security partnership focusing on strengthening Moldovan resilience against external threats. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the Foreign Minister of Romania are in the country visiting just over a fortnight after pro-European President Maia Sandu won re-election, though by a much smaller margin than expected. Well, let's get more on this story with the Moldovan-Romanian journalist Paula Erezanu, who joins us on the line now from Chisinau. Paula, many thanks for coming on this show. I wonder if you could start by telling us about the mood in the country following the election. I mean, there was unprecedented Russian interference in the vote, but the pro-European side won, as we know. Have things settled down and have the results been accepted by everyone?
Well, the opposition parties, especially those, just those supported by Russia, haven't recognized the result. They say that because Sandu's win is largely due to the diaspora, 30% of the votes came from the Moldovan diaspora. So that's people who have left the country in recent years. They may be doing seasonal work there, or they may already be settled. They basically, the pro-Russian parties are trying to undermine the right of the diaspora to vote, and they're trying to say that actually Sandu did not win inside the country, but 70% of her votes came from within the country. So, and all of the institutions have recognized the results, the international partners as well. So that just remains a kind of discourse.
Can you tell us the detail of this new security deal between Moldova and the United Kingdom?
So the new security deal looks at cyber defense and disinformation, and also the ability to kind of watch over financial transactions, including with cybersecurity. And these were the requests of the Moldovan side, because we have had this unprecedented Russian interference in elections where the police say 140,000 people have been receiving payments from Russian banks, including through banks in Transnistria, the breakaway region. Our state institutions have kind of struggled to ensure the security of the vote. But meanwhile, also our independent media is being attacked all the time. So I was speaking the other day with the head of a youth website. So I don't know, it's the equivalent of Dazed and Confused, or of Vice, but not quite as bold, and they are getting cyber attacks every week, and that hasn't been the case before the war in Ukraine. So clearly, all of Moldovan society is being, and all of its pro-European parts are being attacked probably by Russia.
There's also an element of the deal tackling migration from Moldova to Britain and the removal of illegal immigrants.
Yes, I mean, that has probably come from the UK, from the British side, because that's obviously of concern to the UK. But within Moldova, that's not something that is spoken about. People normally migrate to the UK with Romanian passports, with EU passports. That was much easier during while the UK was part of the European Union. Now, of course, that's more difficult. But I suppose all of these security deals need to look at both sides and help each side with their own agenda.
So the Romanian foreign minister is also there at the moment. What's Romania's role in supporting Moldova?
Romania is Moldova's biggest advocate in its EU integration, and it also supports development projects all across the country. So Romania has financed the reparation of kindergartens, of cultural institutions. They've offered school buses and so on. They truly are Moldova's biggest supporter.
Paula, thank you very much indeed. That's the journalist Paula Erizanu there. You're with Monocle Radio. Now, it's Friday today, which means Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller has been very busy recapping the events of the past 7 days for us. Here he is with this week's What We Learned.
We learned this week yet more about the calibre of person who will be leading the free world for the 4 years from January 20th, assuming, of course, that the free world lasts 4 years from January 20th. We learned that Trump was apparently happy to select the rest of his team by idly leafing through the TV guide. We learned that the new Secretary of Education, and it cannot be overemphasised that we are not making this up, and indeed wouldn't dare, is... Get her! OK, it arguably loses something without the visuals, but that is the sound, at least, of World Wrestling Entertainment founder and occasional performer and future head teacher of a nation's children, Linda McMahon, in the ring, amusing the kind of people who think wrestling is real, but elections are fixed. We learned that the next administrator of Medicare and Medicaid services is...
Would you like to take 10 years off your face, going from this to this? Pretty good. How about getting rid of your wrinkles? Going from this to this.
Which is to say television physician Dr. Oz, whose medical credentials are considerable. Columbia University does not make any Yahoo professor of surgery, but much the same could be said, regrettably, of his serial enthusiasms for such arrant quackery as homeopathy, miracle weight loss cures, and talking to the dead.
I've received an overwhelming outpouring of responses of outrageous signs that you say your loved ones are sending from the other side.
Though this latter skill might come in handy once Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s health reforms really get rolling. We learned that the new Secretary of Transportation will be reality TV star and Fox News presenter Sean Duffy, who in fairness was a congressman for a bit, but who, plausibly, Trump just vaguely remembers seeing on Road Rules, and also maybe the word road just sort of stuck in his head.
Here we go, Sean. Rock and roll, baby. Back up all again, we're on our way now.
We learned that the next US ambassador to NATO will be former Attorney General and, pending confirmation of Matt Gaetz, perhaps only the second most ludicrous individual ever to hold that office, Matt Whitaker, a man of many and varied interests. We learned that he once served on the board of a Florida, surprise, company, which flogged such products as a time-traveling cryptocurrency, a range of Bigfoot dolls, a special custom-designed toilet for the better-endowed man, and a hot tub seat in which Whitaker was so confident that he fronted the pitch himself.
It's a unique design that's going to help lots of people that have mobility issues get in and use their hot tub in a safe manner.
Before said company was fined $26 million and wound up by humorless regulatory bodies for bilking its customers. Aww. We learned, therefore, that the rest of NATO might shortly apply to join Russia. Again, however, Whitaker's appointment may fall down at the Senate confirmation stage, as surely the august members of this exalted deliberative body will recognise that there are simply no imaginable circumstances in which the American people would entrust a job so crucial to their nation's security, credibility and prestige to an absurd career grifter with a woeful track record of flogging dodgy tat to credulous yokels.
By popular demand, I'm doing a new series of Trump digital trading cards. You all know what they are. We've had a lot of fun with them. It's called the America First Collection. 50 all-new stunning digital trading cards. It's really something. These cards show me dancing and even me holding some bitcoins.
We learned, however, that at least one American public official was all in on this audacious slate of appointments, possibly hoping to join them. Who knows? Yes, we learned that Oklahoma's Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ryan Walters, had directed all of the Sooner State schools to play their students this.
Dear God, thank you for all the blessings you've given our country. I pray for our leaders to make the right decisions. I pray in particular for President Donald Trump and his team as they continue to bring about change to the country. I pray for our parents, teachers, and kids. They get the best education possible and live high-quality lives.
Which, we learned when we ran the numbers, might be best facilitated by the rental of a U-Haul truck. Oklahoma presently, if on reflection unsurprisingly, rated 49th of the 50 states of the Union for education outcomes. Anyway, Maestro, the sounds of the Azores. For we learned that in the Azores, or really on an Azore, an aeroplane had been grounded by loose rodents for 5 days. We learned that a TAP flight from Lisbon to Ponta Delgada had been bearing cargo including new livestock for an Azorean pet shop, and that some of the boxes containing said livestock had become damaged in flight, permitting the escape of their inmates. Yes, probably. We further learned that retrieving several dozen small furry animals from the fuselage of an Airbus A321 is no small undertaking, and that it had taken maintenance crews the thick end of a week to recover all the runaways. So, the thing to bear in mind here is that we're talking about vaguely mouse-like creatures often kept as domestic pets. Just hold that thought. Because it is now over to our Portugal desk chief Carlota Rebelo, who would like at this time to do a joke she has been working diligently upon ever since this story broke. Come on, let's give her some build-up. Bit more, come on, she's really put a lot into this. And some drums. Righto, Carlotta, hit it.
They wanted to go to Amsterdam. Is this thing working?
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you, Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's the final day of the United Nations Climate Conference, COP29, which has been taking place over the past fortnight in Baku, Azerbaijan. Nations have been working towards a climate finance deal as the deadline for an agreement to be reached looms. Monocle's contributing editor, Sheena Rossiter, has been following this for us. Sheena, it's great to have you with us on the show. Tell us more about the final day. There's been a pretty big setback on the climate finance deal. What happened?
Well, the outcry has been after the text didn't contain an official number. It just contained the letter X instead of setting the $1 trillion fund goal, which was requested to support developing countries. Now, some have called this absolutely outrageous. These negotiations have been going on for 3 years. They've had 14 meetings in total, and not to mention 10 days of negotiations in Baku. And it's important to mention that these talks have largely taken place in private, but reports that have been coming out of COP29 have said that the EU proposed some $200 to $300 billion, but some have called those numbers pathetic. And for context as well, there are governments from almost 200 countries that have been meeting in Azerbaijan to draft up this global settlement on climate finance, with some 60,000 delegates in attendance. And this fund would go to help developing nations, help them shift to low carbon economies and cope with the impact of extreme weather that they're suffering, and that effectively comes from the global north.
So tell us more about what exactly those developing countries are looking for. What do they want?
Well, they want $1 trillion a year in climate finance. What that means is a large portion of which could come directly from global north, or quote unquote rich countries, in the form of grants. And some would be loans as well, and potentially come from the private sector as well. That could kind of make up the remaining chunk of the financial fund. And that also is why these negotiations have been rather complex. But instead of getting clear numbers, the text just had two opinions described by insiders as extreme positions with little compromise.
So what's actually stalling the negotiations? Why can't they agree?
Well, there has been quite a bit of rumblings in private from some countries saying that Saudi Arabia and two bloc groups, the Arab group and the like-minded developing countries, are trying to wreck the prospects of a deal. And one of the texts that was published on Thursday covers the quote-unquote mitigation, which means that curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And that was something that was developed last year in COP28 at the summit in Dubai, where countries passed a resolution to transition away from fossil fuels. And this was the first time in 30 years of talks of such commitment that had been made. And of course, there was huge opposition from Saudi Arabia, which has since attempted to unpick this commitment and have it as an option rather than a goal. So there has been quite a bit of talks that Saudi Arabia is one of the countries holding it up. And also there has been talks that certain countries like China, with its robust economy and being one of the large greenhouse gas emitters in the world, and petrostates like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, they should be contributing more financial assistance to poorer countries due to the pollutants that they contribute to the world, really. And those countries are still classed under the Paris Agreement based on divisions that were set out in that parent treaty. But there's no obligations to contribute towards these finance funds as of yet. And that's what they were looking to change this year.
And there are some new figures out about just how serious fossil fuels are when it comes to the causes of climate change.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why there is really this big push here. So fossil fuels, as we know, they are a main source of planet heating pollutants, and they make up extreme weather and more violent weather. And scientists have expected that some carbon dioxide will have to be captured from factories and atmospheres. But a study from this year that was published in the Nature Communications Journal found that more realistic assumptions of carbon capture and carbon dioxide removal will have to be ditched even faster than what we thought. So it found that the supply of coal would actually have to fall by 99%, oil by 70%, and gas by 84% between the years 2020 and 2050. So that's pretty significant reductions and massive changes for the world. So a lot of those petrostates, you can see why there's pushback, because that's a big part of their business in those countries.
And what's been the reaction of the UN Secretary General?
Pretty strong words in a daily press briefing. It was stated that the UN Secretary General has essentially pleaded, as we get down to the wire here, that there needs to be a clear goal with an ambitious new climate finance goal. He pleaded with negotiators to soften their hard lines, and he stressed that finance is not going to be a handout, but rather it's an investment against the devastation that climate change will have for all of us. And it wasn't just the Secretary General that was making these comments. At the G20 in Brazil, the Brazilian president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, said how important it is that these commitments are met in Baku, especially for a nation like his, where Brazil boasts the world's largest biodiversity.
And have more developed countries actually committed to funding?
A little bit, yes. The U.S. has announced on a positive note that they will contribute $325 million to the Green Technology Fund, and Australia has ponied up too. The Australian Climate Change Minister, Chris Bowen, announced that it will contribute $32.5 million to the loss and damage fund caused by climate crisis. Now, that is seen a little bit as a political move slightly, because Australia is also vying to host COP31, running alongside Turkey for the negotiations that are planned in 2026. So that there is potential interest there of why that fund came up for potential future hosting, but it's still seen as a positive step.
Sheena, thank you very much indeed. That's Sheena Rossiter there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. The Musée d'Orsay in Paris has signed a partnership with Louis Vuitton. The flagship of the LVMH group is set to donate 20 million euros to the Parisian establishment. Well, for more on this, we're joined on the line from Paris by Samantha Tsay, who's a writer, an editor and a consultant. I understand it's absolutely freezing in Paris, Samantha.
Hello, Georgina. It is absolutely freezing here. We had snow. First snow day of the year yesterday, and it's continuing to be quite a chilly day, but so beautiful.
I'm sure. So, listen, Bernard Arnault, who's the owner of LVMH, was widely assumed to be sponsoring the Louvre. Do we know why he's switched allegiance to the Musée d'Orsay?
We don't really know. There's not been an official press release or an announcement as to why he switched allegiance. But it is interesting, given sort of the location of the Musée d'Orsay and given sort of the history of the building, which I think is absolutely stunning. I do know that with this new partnership, I guess the second phase of this partnership, it's going to allow Louis Vuitton to be able to stage fashion shows there and whatnot, which is something that they've always traditionally done at the Louvre. So this is a very interesting development.
But Arnault actually does have a history with the Musée d'Orsay.
Yes. So this is actually the second phase of their partnership. So the first phase was donated I think about 5 years ago, and it's coming up for a renewal. So this is actually the second phase, and it's planned for the period of about like 2026 to 2030. And what's really great about this is that it's going to have a huge implication with how the entrance of the museum is going to be restructured and restored, actually not restructured, but restored. And so it's going to be very much going to help with the flow of how to go in and out of the museum, which has traditionally been not great, to be honest. It's been a little bit crowded, a little bit hectic, it feels for me a little disorganized. So I'm really excited to see how this restoration is going to just ease the flow of foot traffic, among other things.
And do you think that the design of the renovated space might show off Louis Vuitton's influence?
Absolutely. I definitely think Louis Vuitton is having such a great moment, in terms of not just the actual brand Louis Vuitton, but also the LVMH group with Paris and globally. And I think, investing into, cultural building is really is a big milestone in the brand's soft power push and cultural influence.
And do you think that other luxury brands will jump on this trend? I mean, how could this change the way that cultural spaces look and feel?
Well, wealthy families or, big groups giving back to their communities through cultural institutions is something that's happened for a long period of time. And I think what's going to be really interesting is that it's not just the Arnault family, but it's specifically a fashion and luxury conglomerate. I think that's going to really encourage other players to come on board and look at culture and look at the cultural space. And looking at how to further involve themselves. I think that's a really interesting development.
So how is art patronage changing?
Well, art patronage used to be a little bit, more straightforward. If you think about, like, for example, the Medicis, there would be a patronage to a particular artist, perhaps for a work, perhaps for, a site-specific building. I think now art patronage is a lot more, it's got a broader scope, right? So we're not just looking at what they do, for example, like donations for money to restore buildings, but also for places like, Art Basel, Miami, which a lot of luxury brands have had a really big presence there, especially in the last 5 years or so. I think art patronage is definitely a lot more visible than it was a decade ago, even, either throwing parties, sponsoring works, working with artists, collaborations. This isn't particularly new per se, but it's definitely a lot more visible, which, and it's a lot more almost in a way a little bit more, more aggressive than it has been. Like, in the 30s, definitely there was a lot of collaboration, for example, between Schiaparelli and Dali. But now it's a lot more corporate, I feel, and it's a lot more visible, and it really pushes the boundaries of who and how it supports and what that says about the brand.
Samantha, thank you very much indeed. That's Samantha Say there. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Laura Kramer, Carlotta Rebello and Hassan Anderson, our researcher, Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and I'll be back on The Briefing. That's live at midday London time. And The Globalists will return the same time on Monday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.